Boom, rocks in the room. And I'm just really glad that you're here. And I'm here to share a brief, candid history on the real estate industry. I'm going to try to tell it in storybook kind of form. First chapter in my book, Real Estate Without Agents, is going to be such that I want people to understand a little bit about how the industry has progressed and where it came from, how it's progressed, and how it's got to where it is, so that now you can have the absolute confidence, education, and tools that you need to succeed in representing your own real estate transactions. And how did we get here? The history of real estate is not that long of a story, really, because it's only really been a couple hundred years that it's been something that people have had the right to trade in. I mean, if we're going to take the story from caveman to condo, then it's going to seem a little bit unauthentic. Okay. Because again, we used to just travel around, find a place to pitch our tent and hang out there till, somebody came and conquered the space that you were on. It was acquisition by force back in the feudal lords era. They used to be given the right, these lords under the monarchies or the empire or whatever were given the right. We'll just go to the UK, where back in the times of William the Conqueror, he decided to have this set of lords in which he would give land, and then they would lease it out, tenancy, to people that would then be required to tend the land. They would be required to go to war. They would be required to do all kinds of things and still then be taxed along the way and such. So that's really how it was from the year about 1086 all the way up until Hello America, right? And again, different nations came in, established ownership rights to certain portions of North America, Canada, South America, whatever, but I'm going to try to stick to North America here. And, the first real big real estate transaction, I guess, was 1803 or so, when the Louisiana Purchase, I think it was 828,000 square miles that we purchased from France. Y'all remember that from history, right? And then it all just started coming along, in which there was deeded land and the rights to transact between individuals. And in or around 1855, the first real estate brokerage was established. And by 1908, the National Association of Real Estate Agents, the predecessor to the National Association of Realtors, was founded. The association became the originator of the term realtor. And before that, there was this big land grab, land rush, the rush to the West to stake your claim on stuff like the Oklahoma Territory and such. But home sale records began in about 1890, and it was an attempt to create the first real estate association in the United States. However, the attempt failed. It helped set a base for the process, which led to the creation of the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges in 1908. There were no set rules on who can start working as a real estate broker until 1919, just over 100 years ago. So again, real estate brokers by licensure sake didn't begin until 1919. There were no licenses or professional certifications. Even there were, prior to that, a group of characters called curbstoners who would just stick a sign up on the curbstone and leave their contact information for the times, and they were less than reputable. And so they found that, having all these dubious practices in the brokering of home sales and real estate sales, they wanted to try to tighten things up a little bit and codify a code of ethics and such. And there were also these associations or these brokerages, these groups of people that were then licensed by the state and by the nation, by association. They had to cooperate. They had to get together and cooperate. And let me tell you a little story. In 1913, the American League MVP was Walter Johnson, and he beat out Shoeless Joe Jackson. And that was at or about the time of the origination of the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges. And in or about the 1920s, when Walter Johnson went to sell his house, okay, he hired this agent to sell his house, and it was about a $10,000 deal, and the agent charged him 2.5% to sell the house. And it turned out that there was another broker involved, and the agent for Walter Johnson ended up having to split his $250 commission with another agent. And it worked out equitably at that point. They just shared evenly in that transaction at that time, $125 apiece. So that was the origination of the real estate commissioning structure, because I believe it was the National Association of Real Estate Exchanges that declared sharing commissions equally between participating members was required at that time. It had to be shared equally between both parties, whether if the seller had an agent, and everybody represented the seller, but oftentimes another broker would bring the buyer. I'm going to just stick with the commission structure for a while, because it was 2.5% with one of those initial transactions that was recorded. And the standard rate, or the more common rate, trended in towards the 40s. Brokers started assigning value to how much time they were putting into things, how much they were spending on advertising, how much time they were spending people driving around in that 1913 Model T, right, that they still had to pay for. So the commission structure started trending towards 5%. Okay, because the guy who represented Walter Johnson figured out real quick that $125, even though it was a good chunk of cabbage at the time, wasn't going to pay the bills with all the other costs associated. Now, here's what happened with the commissioning structure. Real estate commission, the payment compensation structure, started in about the middle of the 40s. What ended up happening was that there were a conglomerate of the New York real estate boards that got together and had this little covert meeting in which they all decided to quit competing against one another and picking a fight over who was going to charge more or less. And they just decided to fix the pricing at 6%. Okay. This was collusion, and it was price fixing, and that's just what they established. And there was a lot of stuff going on in the 40s. People were pretty distracted by, World War II and trying to get everybody home, and the real estate market was really starting to boom a little bit in or around the late 40s, so everybody was pretty caught up in trying to reestablish normalcy. And Then in about 1952, the Supreme Court caught up with things, and they made a decision that that was illegal, right? You can't do price fixing and call it fair trade, right? You have to have a competitive landscape, and they ruled it illegal in the 50s to have the price fixed at 6%. But the tradition continued because the realtors at large continued to merely use a little linguistic twist and say suggested at 6%. Okay. But that's what they kind of stuck to all this time. Now, from that time in the 50s, real estate commissions have trended downwards. Okay. Where in last year, a statistical study was done where the average commission, and this is trying to fix all of the new models that have come into place, discounted brokerages, flat fee MLS, for sale by owners, but the average commission is down around 4.94% as of last year. Okay. So that's kind of a breakdown on just the trend and story of how the commissioning structure came about to be. And what is the MLS? Okay, the MLS, remember back in the day, multiple listing system, is something that was derived from originally a bunch of folks in a local arena. These brokerages would all get together and have lunch and talk over what their listings were on a regular basis and exchange this information. Here I have this property and I have this buyer looking for this type of property. And they would actually sit down and actually work it out. And then they started publishing a weekly book of listing inventory so that they could keep track of everything. And over the course of time, you know, technology's advanced and everything has come about in such that, well, even back in the mid 90s, when the internet came into being, there was a real rampage from the National Association of Realtors about even allowing their inventory to be openly disclosed to the public, right? There was a big hubbub back in the mid 90s, and I remember that actually. But, you know, they didn't want their listings out available for the general public. But again, the National Association of Realtors lost that battle because we're trying to benefit the consumer here, right? Now, the purpose of the multiple listing service is it's a facility to orderly correlate and disseminate listing information among participants of these real estate exchanges so that they may better serve their clients and customers and the public. And it's also a means by which authorized participants make blanket unilateral offers of compensation to other participants, acting as subagents, buyer's agents, or in other agency or non-agency capacity defined by law. And what it really exists for in this day and age, about the sole purpose that I can derive that it exists from, other than keeping track of real estate records and such, but it is a legal publication platform for the commission, the cooperative fee that is going to be offered unilaterally to all participants. And what happened back in I'm going to back up a little bit into the 70s here, when people started having issue with the fact that everybody represented the seller. Now, again, most of the commission was coming out of the seller's equity. Everybody worked for the seller, but buyer's agency they didn't feel that that wasn't something that existed until the late 70s or early 80s. And then people had to start representing the buyer and openly disclosing that they represented the buyer and not the seller, but they were authorized to accept payment in whole or in part from the seller. And over the course of time, buyers agencies, have worked their way into such a froth over much of the ways that technology has advanced and such, that buyers have started to become very much more aware of how much work that they're doing in finding and procuring their own cause in their real estate searches. And here over the past few years, there have been quite a substantial share of class action lawsuits on buyer representation, because buyers are clicking on a little blue button online and they're being told that they're not having to compensate this agency. Don't worry, the seller will take care of that. And coming to find out that, they're paying exorbitant fees for something that they didn't really achieve right representation or full disclosure and openness in. So that's a big issue. A little story from me here is that, I realized back in, it was about 2005 or six, when the script goes something like, hey, don't worry, I'm worth 3%, but the seller will take care of that. And that's not always true anymore, folks. As far as, for sale by owners and such out there that may or may not be offering compensation, they may or may not be offering 3%, and they may or may not be offering more than that. So in about 2005 or six, I started figuring out that this was going to possibly be a problem for me, because when I would sign a buyer's agency agreement with a client and say, hey, I'm worth 3%, don't worry, the seller will take care of that, when the actual clause right above that says buyer is obligated to compensate buyer's agency, authorized in whole or in part to accept payment from the seller. But I had this young couple that had scraped and saved 40,000 hard-earned cash dollars. They wanted to do things right and buy their first home at 150,000, put 20% down. And I'd shown them 2 or 3 houses. It wasn't not many. Okay. And then they found the house they were wanting to buy. And I said, we want this one. Let's write it up. And I got real excited when I realized that they were going to pay me 6%. Right? See, now here's the problem. I had an agreement with them that said 3%. I'll be getting paid. And all of a sudden I found out that the seller was going to pay me twice as much. And then I realized the seller has equity. The buyer is actually bringing the capital. They're bringing the cash. Buyers pay for everything. And I realized I had a problem. Okay. This young couple had worked really hard for that down payment and 150,000, and they were going to pay me $9,000. 6% of 150,000, folks, is 9,000. That was twice what I had agreed upon, right? But I had no real need to disclose to them that I was getting paid twice of what our contract said. But I turned around and decided to start changing things at that point. Okay. Fast forward, I figured out that there is a distinct difference between seller side services and buyer side services. And one of the challenges that is commonplace anymore and shouldn't be, remember the National Association of Realtors has a code of ethics. And I swore an oath to preserve, protect, and promote my client's interest, not my own, not my brokerage, not the industry. And when a property is being offered out there and a buyer's agent is being incentivized against their client's interest by maybe being compensated more, or tempted to not represent their interests properly by not having a full 3% or 2.5% or even 2%? What if they're not offering a buyer's agency cooperative fee for sale by owners? Take heed. Okay. You don't have to. You have no obligation to pay another party service provider. But this is where the real rub begins, is because you have what it takes to sell your own property in this day and age. Okay. You have the tools, you have the internet, you have a computer, you have one of these, and you can get it done. But you may need a little better education about some of the principles, policies, procedures, and platforms that go along with it. And so that's just a candid history on the real estate industry that I wanted to just kind of commit to this particular medium. And everything that you need to sell your own home is in the link below. You can just come and get it. I want everybody to have what they need to succeed. And I really do appreciate you. Pray blessings on you and your house. And, it's come a long way, folks, in 100 years. It didn't even become an investment until the 70s, and people are more lifestyle purchasers anymore. Make it an investment and really buy with an exit strategy in mind. When you buy a house, you might need to know just what your plan is for selling it, because if it's an investment, you better do everything you can to stay ahead of the appreciation and the inflation and quite frankly, year over year here this year in our area, real property appreciation is up over 18%. How's that going to keep up with your investment portfolio portion of this process? So just get more educated, ask more questions, and I really do appreciate you and pray blessings on you and your house. Make it a great day. All right. Bye-bye.